Good afternoon, I'm Eyal Zisser, and I will be the discussant, the moderator of this important panel, Foreign Powers and the Lebanese Civil War. And when we speak about Lebanon, Lebanese Civil War, but we always should ask ourselves, what civil war? That of the 19th century, that of 58, which had some importance, the last civil war or the coming civil war. And there's always the same actors, the same players, the same ambitions, the same motivation and reasons, and the same dynamic, because this is all
recording in progress.
After all, Lebanon. So without further ado, we'll move to our first speaker, and this will be not Zach, but Dan Naor of Ariel University, who will address the question of Lebanon between East and West on the eve of the Civil War. Let me say a few words about you, Dan, although I'm sure everybody here knows you. So Dan, for the record, yes, Dan is a lecturer at the Department of Middle Eastern Studies at the Ariel University in Israel. He is a researcher of Lebanese history, politics, and society, as well as the Lebanese-Syrian relation. Among his publications are the massacre of 78 in Lebanon, the creation of a resistance myth, and was the 82 Lebanon war deviation from Israel's security doctrine. So, Dan, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. I will speak about Lebanon on the eve of civil war under the presidency of Slimane Frangia. I think it was the latest strong president of Lebanon until, I think, Michel Aoun. And his presidency was fraught with many challenges, internal and external ones. And I will concentrate on the external ones, and I will show how Lebanon tried to navigate between East and West. But when I say East and West, I'm speaking about the broader idea. It is not just United States or the Soviet Union, but the Arab states that align with them. For example, with the US, I can put Jordan and Saudi Arabia, and with the Soviet Union, Syria, and to some extent, Iraq and Libya. So this is Slimane Frangia. His inclination was toward the West. And under his term, he tried to navigate, at least in the first years of his presidency, to navigate Lebanon toward the US orbit. But the US was not so happy, or was not in a hurry to help Lebanon. So Frangia had to navigate to a different direction, to the Eastern Bloc, to Syria, to Libya, and to Iraq, and to some extent to the Soviet Union. I will demonstrate this navigation, or this trip, or this journey using the Palestinian challenge as a case study. Since 1968, Palestinian organization settles in South Lebanon, operating against Israel. These operations divided Lebanon into two groups. The one group supported the Palestinians and included, generally speaking, mostly Muslims, and the other group opposed the Palestinian organization's activity, and it was comprised mainly, but not all, with Maronite Christians. And both groups tried to enforce their will upon the other but with not much success. A success of one group will destroy the other and destroy Lebanon. So Lebanon was in a delicate position, because if it want to enforce its sovereignty over all Lebanon, then the Muslims will cry out, and Lebanon will be collapse. So this journey of trying to find a way in this stormy water, well, I think it defined the presidency of Slimane Frangieh. And of course, it was not just connected to Lebanon. The Palestinian issue was connected to the whole region. The Arab states wanted that the Palestinian organization's activity will continue, but not from their own territory. They wanted that this activity will take place from Lebanon or from Jordan, but not from their territory. If Jordan or Lebanon tried to fight against the Palestinians, then all Arab states stand out and say, no, you should stop. This activity must be continued. And of course, Israel was not sit idle. And when the Palestinian activity, when the Palestinians make terrorist attacks against Israel, then Israel attacked back. And Lebanon paid the price. In 1969, Lebanon and the PLO signed the Cairo Agreement that enabled the Palestinian organizations to act from Lebanon. I think it was a capitulate agreement. Lebanon has no choice but to sign this agreement, because she could not stood up against the Arab pressure against her. And this where our story is begin. Because Slimane Frangieh went into the scene after the Cairo Agreement was signed. And he had to deal with this reality. So first, he was not an intellectual. He was a thug. In his youngest, he was a family thug. And there is a joke about him that the Lebanese say that they brought him because of his muscles, but he preferred to use his brain and see where we got. But I think he was not so stupid as trying to portray him. And the people in Lebanon hoped that he could restrain the Palestinian organization's activity. As I said before, his inclination was toward the West. So before he entered the Lebanese President Palace, he sent a missionary to the U.S. Embassy to find out what will be the U.S. reaction if a civil war will be opened in Lebanon, much like what happened in Jordan. And the Americans said, we will keep the integrity of Lebanon, but with not much elaboration what the Americans will do. I think that Frangieh knew that a confrontation with the PLO is a question of time. And he tried to acquire weapons to the Lebanese army. He went to the US and Western countries and signed arms deal with them. But in order to preserve the balance of power and the Lebanese neutrality, Lebanon could not go just to the West. It has to go also with the East in order to keep the balance of power within Lebanon. So aside of signing arms deals with the US and Western countries, Lebanon also signed arms deal with the Soviet Union. And I think that until 1973, Lebanon was under the US and the Western influence. And Frangieh himself believed that in time of crisis, it will be the US that will assist Lebanon and not other countries. But then, the confrontation that was anticipated had come in May 1973. The Lebanese army tried to fight the PLO, even bombed some refugee camps with the Lebanese Air Force. But the Lebanese action heralded Arab reactions. Syria closed its border with Lebanon, and other Arab countries, except from Jordan, well, they protest about what Lebanon is trying to do. Lebanon turned to the US for help, but the US was in no hurry to help Lebanon. And even arms deals that were signed years before, their shipments yet not arrived. And the US did nothing to speed it up. So, if the West is not delivered, let's go to the East. And since May 1973, Lebanon went to the Eastern Bloc. It strengthened its ties with Syria and with Iraq and with Libya. But these forces were also unreliable and also tried to intervene in Lebanese affairs. So Lebanon found itself isolated without much help. This is a story. These are some insights. I think that the US should have done more to help Lebanon. And put it on the table, the Lebanese expectations were high. They wanted that the US will send their army like what they did in the first civil war in 1958, but the US did not want to do it. But at least to speed the shipments of arms deals that were already signed, that at least what the Americans could do. But they did not. And sadly, Lebanon is a sad story. On the eve of civil war, Lebanon found itself alone in front of the challenges that come in Thwarted. Thank you.
I mean, one should wonder whether we speak about the civil war of the 80s or the coming civil war because as you all know, Slimane Frangieh is not only the Lebanese president of the 70s, his grandson, who is called Slimane Frangieh, is also a candidate. We can say even at the time he was a leading candidate, I think even supported by Hezbollah to the office of the president. Battat, who will address us on the question of Rashid Karami and the Palestinians, Lebanon's foreign policy from 58 until 76. Evrak is a junior researcher at the Middle East and Central Asia Research Center and a PhD candidate at Ariel University, and his dissertation examines Lebanese Prime Minister Rashid Karami political career and the evaluation of the Lebanese Sunni community 43 to 87. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
bit shorter. So hold on. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I know the panel after lunch is not the easiest one, but I hope Danny was able to wake everyone up, and I hope I can continue that momentum. So today I'm going to be speaking about my research on Rashid Karami and his foreign policy from 1958, between 1958 and 1976. As Lebanon's longest-serving prime minister, Karami's leadership on the Palestinian issue significantly influenced Lebanon's political trajectory during that period. So my presentation is going to focus on two things. First, how Karami's foreign policy sought to align Lebanon with the broader Arab world, a very contentious issue. And through his consistent prioritization of the Palestinian issue. And the second point is how that stance influenced Lebanon's domestic stability, sectarian dynamics, and foreign policy amidst the regional turbulence. So I'm going to provide a brief background on Karami and the Lebanese Sunni community. I'm going to outline the political career and foreign policy trajectory through three distinct phases, and then I'll put two key moments in his foreign policy during this time period and his approach, and then concluding with his legacy and relevancy today. Okay. So let me move this here. So basically. That's a picture of Rashid Karami. Okay, this is really annoying. So basically, following the creation of Greater Lebanon in 1920, because you need to go a little bit back. So there was the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and the Sunni community in Lebanon was largely opposed to the creation of the new state, preferring instead to reunite with so-called Greater Syria. The opposition kind of persisted through the French Mandate period, and then after Lebanese independence, when Al-Mitak al-Watani, the National Pact, formalized the allocation of the prime minister position to a Sunni Muslim. But this came at the cost of abandoning the goal of reunifying this Greater Syria idea, that is Syria and today's Syria and today's Lebanon. And that was a big betrayal, and that basically continued on for a very, I mean, I would say even till today, so to speak. And that's where Rashid Karami rose to his prominence. His political career was marked by a commitment to strengthening the position of the Sunni community, and aligning the Lebanese, or I would say aligning Lebanon with the Arab nationalist movement in the late 1950s or mid to late 1950s, and as you're going to see also in the 60s with Gamal Abdel Nasser's Egypt and his pan-Arab or pan-Arabism that he wanted to create. So let's go to the next. So, yeah. So that's Karami, and that's Fuad Shihab, and it was, let's call it a bromance, if I can use that terminology. So Fuad Shihab was president from 58 to 64. So during the presidency of Fuad Shihab, Karami served as prime minister for much of this period. Shihab's movement, Al-Nahaj al-Shihabi, it aimed to implement reforms to address long-standing grievances of Lebanon's Muslim communities, particularly the Sunni and the Shia, or mainly the Sunni in this period, and modernizing the political system. Shihab's goals included reducing the dominance of the Maronite Christian community and remaining neutral on international affairs. Now, this idea was a match made in heaven for Karami, because now he could persist his foreign policy that he wanted in the 50s when Khamis Shamoun was the president, but it was, let's just say, it wasn't a bromance, it was much more confrontational, which eventually, I'm not going to say it's because of Karami, but I'm just going to say that in the 50s, that and what happened in Iraq led to the 1958 civil crisis. So Karami's alignment with Shihab enabled him to pursue foreign policy, which supported pan-Arabism to a certain extent, particularly through close ties with Abdel Nasser. And the period was characterized by relative political stability, despite Shihab's controversial reliance on the internal security apparatus, le Deuxième Bureau, which strained relations with some Sunni leaders like Sab Salam, for instance. Nevertheless, Karami's consistent support of the Arab cause, if you will, laid the groundwork for this his later assertive policies on the Palestinian cause. Then we go into the Helu presidency. Danny was right. Helu and Karami were not exactly on the same terms. The thing with Helu was that first he was less decisive. That's the first point I want to make. But the other point about it was about the Palestinians. Karami, and I saw this in the archives, he lamented profusely, especially to the Americans, that he couldn't trust Helu because he could never make his mind up. The frustrations really became more pronounced following the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, which resulted in an influx of Palestinian refugees into Lebanon and increased the PLO's presence. Helu's passive stance towards the Palestinian armed factions in Lebanon, along with his lack of support for the growing Palestinian movement, created a political rift. And vis-a-vis the 1969 Cairo Agreement, Karami, I would say, I don't want to say officially it was because of him, but he definitely played an integral role in signing the secretive agreement. I'll go more into detail about it in just a second. So Karami, while he intended to placate tensions, the agreement effectively ceded parts of Lebanese sovereignty to the PLO and laid the groundwork for future conflicts. And then Karami's role, like I said, in the agreement, highlighted his commitment to the Palestinian cause, but it also deepened the sectarian divide between, particularly with the Maronite Christian community, which viewed the agreement as a betrayal to Lebanese national interests. Yeah, let's stay on this slide. So from Black September to Lebanon's descent, I should say, into civil war. The early 1970s brought new challenges for Lebanon. Frangia, as we saw before, who won the election by one vote, famously in the parliament. But the Black September conflict in Jordan, where the Jordanian army expelled the PLO, resulted in the relocation of thousands or even more armed Palestinian fighters to Lebanon. This development escalated tensions within Lebanon as the influx of the armed Palestinians heightened the Maronite community's fears of being overwhelmed and intensified the internal power struggles. And then Karami, now firmly aligned with the Palestinian movement, some even say he had donated to the PLO. Not only him, other Sunni Zaim. And he continued to advocate for their autonomy within Lebanon, seeing it as part of a broader strategy to integrate Lebanon into the Arab world, or the Arab cause, however you want to define it. Sorry. His stance alienated key segments of the Lebanese population, particularly the Maronite Christians and the conservative political figures. Well, let me just get some water. And the subsequent clashes between the Lebanese army and the Palestinian factions led to the 1973 Melkart Protocol, which attempted to regulate Palestinian activities within Lebanon, but failed to prevent the growing violence. So you can see already the 1969 Cairo Agreement definitely escalated tensions. And then by 1975, Lebanon was on the brink of a civil war. And you can see now that Karami's policies, which sought to preserve Lebanon's Arab identity or let Lebanon join the Arab world, his support for the Palestinian cause contributed to the polarization of Lebanese society. The conflict between pro-Palestinian and anti-Palestinian factions within Lebanon escalated into the Second Civil War, which began in April of 1975 with violent confrontations between the Phalangists and Palestinian militias in Beirut. Oops, I went the wrong way. Yeah. By the way, that's Hello. That's Frangieh and Abdallah Liafi, another Zaim from Beirut. They're playing Sheshbesh in an airplane. So, interesting. Anyhow, so two key moments in Karami's foreign policy. Like I mentioned, the 1969 Cairo Agreement, which was a landmark event in Lebanese politics, secretive at the time, but quite well known today, and it granted the PLO autonomy to operate in southern Lebanon. And Karami's involvement in the negotiations signaled a determination to integrate Lebanon more deeply into the Arab world. But the agreement's concessions to the Palestinian armed presence in Lebanon set the stage for future conflicts and strained Lebanon's sectarian fabric. And then the 1973 Melkart Protocol was basically the Cairo Agreement, but with many more, let's call it quote unquote, stricter stipulations, where the PLO and the other factions, Palestinian factions, were allowed to operate. But it was largely ineffective, and it only served to highlight the Lebanese state's inability to control its own territory. But Karami's support for the protocol, despite its shortcomings, demonstrated his desire to balance his advocacy for the Palestinian cause with the need to maintain semblance of state authority. Oops, I did it again. So let's let's do this one. So I'm going to a little bit of a spoiler alert. I mean, this is not part of the paper, but I'll just say it very quickly. He was assassinated in '87, and it marked the end of an era for Lebanese Sunni politics, the way I write. He's revered within the Sunni community as a martyr, a shaheed, for his unwavering support for the Palestinian cause, and more specifically, his vision to put Lebanon as part of a broader, to put Lebanon into the Arab world. But his legacy was also quite controversial. And then he prioritized the Palestinian issue over Lebanon's internal stability, which contributed to the fragmentation of the Lebanese state and the descent into civil war. Karami's career in foreign policy illustrate the challenges of navigating multi-confessional political system in a region marked by external intervention and internal strife. And his vision of Lebanon as a key player in the Arab world, or the Arab nationalist movement, if you will, often conflicted with the need to maintain internal cohesion, ultimately contributing to the destabilization of the Lebanese state. And, oops, I did it. So I'm going to just conclude with a couple of lessons based on his leadership. So his foreign policy from 58 to 76 was shaped by his commitment to the Palestinian cause and his vision of Lebanon's place in the Arab world. His policies, while rooted in a desire to protect Sunni interests and assert Lebanon's Arab identity, if you will, ultimately exacerbated Lebanon's sectarian divisions and contributed to the outbreak of the civil war. And as Lebanon, as we know, continues to grapple with its complex sectarian landscape and regional pressures, Karami's legacy offers important lessons for contemporary policymakers on the risks of prioritizing external alliances over internal stability. So with that, I'll end, and oops, I don't know how to, there we go. Thank you very much.
Since you stay with us, we can delay the Q&A to the end of this panel. So it's Lebanese Arab identity, and now what is in question is Lebanon's Iranian identity. Isn't it fascinating? So we spoke about, Dan spoke about the United States and the Soviet Union, and you spoke about the Arab world, and now we'll speak about Israel, and it does remind me what the spokesperson of the State Department just said a few days ago. He was asked about the American position vis-a-vis the Israeli incursions or the Israeli military ground operation in southern Lebanon, and he said, well, we entirely support what with Israel, you never know, they start limited incursion and they can get to Beirut. Well, that's not exactly what he said, but that's what he meant. So for discussing the Israeli intervention in Lebanon 76 to 82, we have with us Yogev, Dr. Yogev Elbaz, and Yogev is a postdoctoral fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies at Tel Aviv University. He recently completed his wonderful doctorate with high honors regarding this issue, the Israeli policy towards Lebanon, and this research encompasses Israel's diplomacy in the region, the Middle Eastern system, and Israel methodology. So, sorry, yeah. So the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. So today we'll talk about one dimension of my PhD, the Dream Palace. Yes, I stole it from Thwarted. Israel's intervention in Lebanon from 76 to 82. So anyone who deals with Lebanon, and especially with 1982 war, know the foolhardy plan of Ariel Sharon invading Lebanon, expelling the PLO from Lebanon to Jordan. The Kingdom of Jordan will collapse, and a Palestinian state will be established on the top of the kingdom, and Israel will live happily ever after. And at the end of this process, Lebanon and Israel will sign a peace treaty, and Lebanon will be Christian. It's not happened, like it didn't happen, and my argument that is not, because of this foolhardy plan, almost all the scholars blamed Sharon of this war, and not just the scholars, also journalists, saying 1982 is a Sharon war. So my argument, it's more complicated, okay? It's not really Sharon's ultimate responsibility, but this was a long term of self-deception, Israeli decision makers' self-deception about the capability and the will of the Christian Lebanese to really form a peace treaty with Israel. So we will get started. A brief background. I don't have time, so I won't like talk about all the background, but this is some of the main connections between Israel and Christian Lebanese from Zionist movement in the 30s till the 70s with Hilu. And just keep in mind, this is long and depth connections. This is one thing. And the other thing is, because of this long and depth connection, Israeli decision makers romanticized Christian Lebanese and take this Christian Lebanese and try to do a minority alliance, try to do alliance of minorities of the Middle East, and the Maronites, especially the Maronites, was a great pillar in this big program. So let's start it. Again, I won't touch in the passive involvement, but as Zach said, the civil war erupted in April 75, and Rabin administration, the first Rabin administration, was in charge, and I don't want to touch in the passive involvement. And in in spring 76, the connection with the South began. In March 10th, in patrol of the IDF, he did a patrol in the border between Lebanon and Israel, and saw a stone and a letter attached to the stone. The letter was in Arabic. They don't understand Arabic, so they call an intelligence officer, and so on, so on, so on. And then the message, and then the intelligence officer in charge of Lebanon get this message. The letter said, "We are a bunch of people from Klea, okay, and we want to be in connection with Israel." This is in March 76. Just a reminder, the Lebanese army crumbled at this time, and South Lebanon was in turmoil, and Klea people had connections with Israel long before it. In 58, a civil war, officer named Clovis Francis, he is from Klea, also get in touch in Israel. This time was Staff Sergeant, First Staff Sergeant Aid Musalem, and this officer, this Israeli officer named Yair Ravitz, I interviewed him. He was in charge of Lebanese agents operating in Lebanon from the Israeli side. He get this letter, and he was in skies because he trying to do this connection 2 months before. He bypassing all the IDF change of command and send a letter to the commander of IDF intelligence, Shlomo Gazit, and General Shlomo Gazit, say to him, we must help Lebanese Christian in the south. We need to take advantage of this turmoil, and it's nobody heard him, but this letter was bursting into open door, and of course Israel, especially this Ravitz, hugged the opportunity, and just after a few days, in the same night, they get a meeting, and Israel obliged to give them a little bit money, but money and ammunition and arms. And after a few days, also Ramesh get in, and then Al-Mashaib, and then even the Druze, Kawakba and Hasbaya, the opposite, Hasbaya and Kawakba. And later on, a lot of villages, especially Christians and Druze, get to this alliance, and also in Ibel, Dabel, Kufr Kuzah, etc. And even Aishia. In July 76, even Aishia, northern to Litani River. And as usual, the Israeli officers encourage the Christians to expand this enclave, and they conquered a little bit more and more and more. So we need to be like, we need to be bigger. So Hasbaya and Klea get together, and also in the south near Ramesh. This is very interesting. A commander from the north came to Ramesh. His name was Abu Emil, and the commander of Israel Northern Command, Raful, met with him and said to him, "Okay, I need you to do a plan to expand and to conquer Hanin. A village, a Shiite village in the enclave. So Abu Emil, as all Lebanese in the civil war, did it and slaughtered all Hanin. And just days after it, in retaliation, the Shiite slaughtered Aishia. Wait a second. And that's it. Let's go on. So after this, it's not just it was a military side, but also civilian side. Again, it was by accident. One night, the people of Kleya called Yair Ravitz and said to him, our priest is very sick, we need help. And of course, Ravitz bring ambulance, and the priest came to Israel and get treatment. And side by side, a lot of people came to Israel and to get treatment. And because of the roads was cut off to the north, so treatment. And after it, just buy some grocery. And after it, it's expand and expand and expand. And it's get to a situation that Israel even import agricultural goods, tobacco from Ar Jayun, a lot of vegetables and other stuff, and even export Israeli goods to the Arab world through Lebanon, erasing its source and exporting it to Lebanon. Just for understanding, in August 77, after the Secretary of Defense, Peres, announced of the good fence policy, 1 year after it, in July 77, Israel imported from South Lebanon 104 tons of tomatoes, 287 tons of melons, 40 tons of grapes, etc., etc., etc. It was a big industry. And it's not just with South. Israel wants a connection with the Christian leadership in the north, in Beirut, especially to Jemail's and to Shamoun families. And Yigal Alon, the foreign minister of Israel, and Dave Kimchi, the deputy of the Mossad, they pushed and compelled Rabin to connect Jemail's and Shamoun. Both of them were very advocates of the minority alliance. So they pushed Rabin to do it, and they succeed. Again, also Kimchi, like Ravitz, 2 months before it, sent a lot of letters, even bypassing everybody, and of course, bypassing the head of the Mossad, Hofi, and turn by himself to the prime minister, try to convince him to do these connections, and it succeeded after all. And the IDF and the Mossad sent delegations to Catholic and Junia, and I read the protocols of the delegations, very, very funny. They're shocked, very, very Orientalist, but very funny. They are shocked. They are speaking English, very good English, and very good French, and they are dressed like European people, and they give us a lot of food, and casinos, and women, and etc., etc., etc. So they're very impressed, but because of this impression and this close friendship, they dismissed massacres that the Christians did and other things, and then Israel go deep and deeper in the connections. I want to refer to Begin administration, just in a brief. Holocaust perception, everybody knows. Begin saw the world in black and white. He was a Holocaust survivor by himself, and he thought that, I don't know if he really thought it, but it's very, very, you see it in the writing and in his speeches. He thought that Christian minority in Lebanon facing extinction. And he compared it to the Jews in Europe in the 40s. And in his term, the Italian operation in March 78. Again, Israel went in Lebanon without any plan, without any political plan. I don't know if it's recall you something, but because of this unplanned operation, so Israel compelled by the UN and the US to retreat from Lebanon, but before it retreated, the UN established UNIFIL, that we know until today, and Israel established this security belt. It's from 78, not from 82. And the Christian militias were now on this security belt in south Lebanon, protecting the Israeli border. And one of the most craziest things I ever saw in my PhD, this FFLF organization, in 78 and 9, after one of brutal attacks of the Palestinians on the Haran family in Ariel, two senior officers in the IDF, Chief of Staff Raful and the Commander of Northern Command Janos Bengal, they decided to establish, just them, without any papers, they decided to establish a terror organization in Lebanon. They put Meir Dayan in charge, and he recruited Shiites from the south, and they started to bomb a lot of places in Lebanon against the PLO. It's called Jabhat Litahrir Lebanon Min al-Ghurba, the front for free Lebanon from foreigners, and it was a big story. I go on, and one of my last things, Weizmann plan. Ezra Weizmann, he was the Secretary of Defense before Sharon. Look at the year, 2 years before Sharon get in office, and Weizmann took all of his consultants, and they dealt with Lebanon and asked what we can do in Lebanon. And this is the objective, okay? Read the objective, sorry. We need Lebanon to be a sovereign and united Lebanon without Syrians sympathetic to Israel, built on a Christian element. We need to breaking the status of the Palestinians so that we won't have to fight with them every day for the land of Israel, not politically, and not militarily. And determining the character of Lebanon and annihilation of Eastern Front. This is the base of the famously Oranim plan, 2 years before Sharon get in office. So it's not really just Sharon blame. And just last things, I want to show you some documents from archives and what I mean that I said a dream palace. In a meeting between, I hope you see it? Yeah? Okay. In a meeting between the Prime Minister Begin and Cyrus Vance, Secretary of State, in August 10, 1977, a lot before the war, 5 years before the war. All the who's and the who's was in this meeting. So Weizmann, the Secretary of Defense, said about the Christian Lebanese, they expressed the wish now to be associated with us, with Israel. So Sam Lewis, the ambassador, said, what do they mean, associated with? Weizmann, they mean a peace treaty. With Israel? Yes, very much so. They know, doesn't mean peace treaty at all, but in Israeli eyes, it was very nice to think that. And again, last but not the least, paper from, you remember Kimchi, Dave Kimchi? He was the deputy of the head of the Mossad, and he fired by the head of the Mossad because of the Lebanon affair. He went in the back of the Hofi, the head of the Mossad, and Hofi get mad and fired him. So now he was the CEO of the Foreign Ministry of Israel. And then he wrote, after a visit in the US, he wrote to Nachik Navot. He was the head of one of the branches of the Mossad, head of Tevel. From a conservation, with Chuck Hogan and Bob Ames, two of the most expertise in the CIA for Lebanon. The Lebanese affair, we talk about it. And Bob Ames, who later killed in a bomb attack in '83 in Lebanon, said to him, "There are too many bullets in name of Bashir, and we won't see the alternative if we will eliminate it." And Kimchi said, okay, the American doesn't understand nothing. So that's it. This is my final page. At first, Israel seems to succeed because in 6th of June 1982, it invaded Lebanon. 1 week after it, the IDF get and sieged Beirut. In August 15, in the middle of August, Bashir, the main ally of Israel in Lebanon, got elected. And in the end of August, the PLO expelled from Lebanon. So all things good, but in Lebanon, in the mid of September, Bashir was killed, assassinated by the Syrians, and the whole dream palace collapsed. And Israel stayed in Lebanon for the next 18 years. Thank you very much.
It's amazing how history repeats itself, because I do believe that there are people in Lebanon, in Israel, and in the United States who once again build such a palace of dreams nowadays, speaking about the other Lebanon that is waiting us all to get rid of Hezbollah. And once again, many successful tactical moves, but with no strategy, led to a success that nobody expected, the elimination of the leadership of Hezbollah. And once again, we should ask ourselves whether we'll get to the Zaharani, Litani, Awali. Okay, but we'll have time to discuss it. And from Israel, we'll move to Syria. Once upon a time, there was a country called Syria, and it was an important player, maybe in the future, who knows. And this issue will be addressed by Jesse Weinberg, laying the groundwork, how Syria thwarted American policy in Lebanon, 82 to 83. And a few words about Jesse is Neubauer Research Associate at the INSS and doctoral candidate at the Yavetz School of History at Tel Aviv University. His doctoral dissertation is a study of Syrian-American bilateral relations from 1977 to 92. So, Jesse, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ariel. Hear me okay? Okay. Just set this here. Adam? Ah. And back? How do I go back? Okay, perfect. Okay. Can you hear me? All right. So my talk today deals with the period from the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in June of 1982 until the signing of the May 17th Accords. So a couple of general points before I start here. This presentation makes a couple of, as I said, general points. The first is that a superpower, the United States, is intervening and dealing with facts in a highly contested regional state, Lebanon, and a powerful actor, Syria. And this underscores the limited ability of the United States, as we will see, to change the facts on the ground. Another important angle is the clash amongst American foreign policy between the global and regional view of Middle Eastern politics. And finally, as the Syrians challenge American policy, it really underscores the ability of a strong and concerted regional actor who doesn't have anywhere near the same military capabilities as the US, but they don't really need them, because what they need are committed supporters, motivated proxies, and geographical proximity in order to achieve their goals and underscore their interests. Okay. Just a couple of other points here. We're starting in the Reagan administration. When Reagan entered office at the beginning of 1981, this was the reassertion of the Cold War as the central focus for American foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East after the Carter administration, which tried to have a comprehensive peace accord. And so for Reagan and his administration, the Cold War was the primary lens through which it viewed not only global politics, but also the regional angle within the Middle East. As Yogev, by the way, aptly described, Syria was, of course, in Lebanon. They had intervened in 1976 following the so-called Red Line, which actually had Israeli quiescence as well, too. That's another very interesting research topic which I deal with in my doctorate. And then in 1981, the summer of 1981, after the adventuresome Bashir Gemayel moved the Phalange forces into the Bekaa Valley town of Zahle, Syria inserted surface-to-air missiles, which prompted a significant diplomatic crisis. So this is some of the background which brings us to the current jumping-off point of departure. Okay. Oh, and the last one is strategic consensus, which when Reagan entered office, he tried to unify and coordinate the foreign policies of Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states as a concerted effort to balance against Soviet influence in the region. This, of course, did not work because those states had disparate interests and could not see eye to eye on basically anything. I think an apt example of this was, of course, the AWACS crisis, when the Reagan administration tried to sell advanced spy planes to Saudi Arabia, and Israel ardently opposed that. Okay, so that's some background here. Whoops. Okay. So our point of departure here, Israel invades Lebanon, as again Yogev aptly described, on the 6th of June 1982, ostensibly to crush the PLO, but again, as Yogev mentioned, really Ariel Sharon, the defense minister, had a much wider and grandiose plan to install the Phalange in Lebanon and to achieve a peace treaty with the Lebanese. A interesting point on this actually was, this was expressed by Yitzhak Shamir to Alexander Haig, the American Secretary of State, and he said, and I quote, we see developing in Lebanon a quasi-El Salvadorian situation. On the one hand, we have the PLO and its supporters with the backing of the Syrian army, and on the other hand, now a consolidated, almost united Christian front under the leadership of Bashir Gemayel. And if this force is supported by the Western world and the intervention of the Syrians will be neutralized, it is possible to get a new situation and maybe a new Lebanon. A new democratic and pro-Western Lebanon will emerge. This new Lebanon may be, we hope it will be, at peace with Israel. It will be a pro-Western country. So that was the Israeli dream. As we shall see, that did not come to pass. The Israeli invasion, of course, was a significant military success, but it did prompt a considerable outcry from Reagan. In June of 1982, Begin had a previously scheduled meeting with Reagan at the White House, and Reagan ripped the Israeli prime minister, saying that the military operation, well, the United States did, of course, ostensibly support this, and actually the documentary evidence, if you look at Charlie Hill's archives at the Hoover Institution and also Seth Anziska's recent book, the U.S. actually did give the Israelis a green light, but no matter. Reagan was furious about the considerable bloodshed that was taking place in Beirut, but Begin, smartly underlining the ability of regional states to manipulate their alliances with the superpowers, framed Israel's invasion squarely within the Cold War context. And he said that the PLO presence in Lebanon was, frankly, of course, a Soviet base. And I quote, "Mr. President, we now realize that these areas have been turned into a Soviet base, the principal center of Soviet activities in the Middle East." So again, that provides an angle on how Begin sought to present this to the Americans. As this was going on and Israel was laying siege to Beirut, the PLO forces were trapped within, and the United States made efforts to get the PLO out, to evacuate them. We will see in the July meeting between Reagan and Abdel Khalim Khaddam, the Syrian foreign minister, that Syria was frankly not amenable to cooperate. And in this meeting, which also included Prince Saud, the Saudi foreign ministers, this was a delegation under the aegis of the Arab League, Khaddam said to Reagan that he would refuse to take in the PLO, and that both Saud and Khaddam said to Reagan that they supported a simultaneous withdrawal of both Israeli and Syrian forces from Lebanon. And this prompted Khaddam to remark that the Syrian presence in Lebanon is not equal to the Israeli presence. Syria entered Lebanon for reasons that are well known, and Syria will go out as it came in. But to link the Israeli withdrawal to the Syrian withdrawal is unacceptable. Okay, so this is the first expression of the Syrian position on this particular issue. Now, the Americans eventually tried to find a way to get the PLO out, and this was eventually discussed in an August 4th National Security Council meeting, where the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Jeane Kirkpatrick, a well-known Cold Warrior, basically said that we shouldn't lose fact of the PLO. They're not a bunch of agrarian reformers, this famous quip of hers. And she succeeded in convincing Ronald Reagan to evacuate the PLO forces under the aegis of what was called the MNF, the multinational forces, which included, of course, a significant American contingent, but also with British, French, and Italian forces as well. And this occurred, of course, concurrently, as Yogev mentioned, to the election of Bashir Gemayel as the president of Lebanon. So, as it stands at this particular juncture, everything was going according to plan. The Israelis had their man, the US was getting the PLO out, but as we shall see, that is not what came to pass. And in fact, Philip Habib, the US Special Envoy, the Lebanese, the proud son of Lebanese parents from Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, said in a letter to Secretary of State George Shultz, "With Bashir Gemayel as president and a Lebanon prepared to have good relations with Israel, it will be more important for the Israeli presence to be used as a lever to get the Syrians out. Dealing with the PLO will be easier with the Syrians out of the way and a Lebanese government more sure of itself. Getting the Syrians to agree to withdraw their forces is technically simple, but politically difficult to arrange." So this shows you, again, the outsized American optimism for what could potentially happen. This, of course, as I said, did not come to pass. Bashir Gemayel was killed on the 14th of September, 1982, and that was followed by the Sabra and Shatila massacre, which I don't think I need to go into the details of that. And the Sabra and Shatila massacre prompted the return of the MNF at the end of September and a renewed mandate. Now, the killing of Bashir Gemayel and his replacement by his brother Amin actually begins the sort of pivot towards a more pro-Syrian approach. Syria is starting to get the ball moving and to really put pressure on the Americans. And as we will see, this is exactly what happened. As I mentioned, the PLO was evacuated. Let's go here. So on the left, you see Bashir Gemayel. On the right, Raful Eitan, the Israeli commander of the IDF, and that is the map of the invasion. Okay, so after the assassination of Bashir Gemayel, Philip Habib, the consistently irrepressible American envoy, was back on his shuttle diplomacy flights, and he returned to Damascus at the beginning of October, seeking to try and achieve a Syrian withdrawal from Lebanon. There he met with Farouk al-Shara, who was the deputy at that point to Abd al-Khalim Qadam, and he came up against concerted opposition from the Syrian diplomat. Habib, in effect, proposed a two-step disengagement, with the Syrians withdrawing to the Bekaa and the Israelis withdrawing within 40 kilometers of the border, and a complete withdrawal of foreign forces, but that was not to be. He did not accept any of the American proposals whatsoever. It's important to note also that in September there was the Fez conference, and at the Fez conference the Syrians stated that they would not withdraw from Lebanon only in light of the Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon. So in other words, they did not accept the idea of linking the Israeli position and their position within Lebanon. So, and that would be the contention of the Syrians throughout all of the negotiations with the United States. They would not withdraw simultaneously to the Israelis. They would only withdraw following an Israeli withdrawal. Okay? Onward. Amin Gemayel, an interesting figure. So after he replaced his brother, and it's important to note that historically, Amin Gemayel had always been the Gemayel brother with close ties to Damascus. So Pierre Gemayel, the sort of grande dame of the Phalange, had basically split his brothers. His sons. One son, Bashir, was the one who developed ties with Israel, and Amin had always had good relations with the Syrians. And when Amin ascended to the presidency, and ostensibly, of course, he wanted to maintain his Western outlook, but the Syrians saw this as a positive step. The Syrian broadsheet Al-Thawra viewed his rise to power as a positive development and referenced his earnest attempts to secure a Syrian withdrawal from Lebanon. And Amin would continue to play a sort of back-channel double game, as we will see just in a second, manipulating between and triangulating between the Israelis, the Americans, and the Syrians as negotiations began to take place towards a peace agreement. Now, to Damascus's viewpoint, Syria found itself at the nadir of its strategic position. They found themselves surrounded by Israeli forces in Lebanon with significant economic problems, and frankly, they were in a significantly problematic position also at the beginning of 1982. You had the Hama uprising and a long-standing, long-simmering Islamist insurgency within Syria. Assad's biographer, Patrick Seal, I think perhaps summed up his views, saying, rarely had he felt, Assad, more isolated and unfairly maligned than in the autumn of 1982. And this is a very important point, which of course drives Assad's foreign policy. It's also important to note that in October of 1980, the Syrians had signed a treaty of friendship with the Soviet Union. But, as always, seeking to achieve strategic parity with Israel, the Syrians were never able to extract the same amount of support from Moscow as Israel was able to extract from Washington. And so this was, of course, another bone to pick, if you will, for Assad, as the Soviets were frankly distracted by both the war in Afghanistan, but also the solidarity protests in Poland in 1982. And I think this could perhaps be best represented by Karen Brutens, the Soviet Armenian diplomat and Politburo official, who said that our views on the situation in Lebanon with the Syrians did not quite coincide. The Syrian leadership in its heart of hearts believed and still believes that this is an artificial state, part of greater Syria, torn away by the colonialists. So again, the Soviets had their more instrumental view of looking at the Syrians, but the Syrians could never really get what they wanted from Moscow. Yet, even with this, their relationship began to change. After the death of Brezhnev, and we will see here, you can see Brezhnev there with Hafez al-Assad, and that's, by the way, the headquarters of the Katab. In East Beirut. Yuri Andropov, the long-standing KGB chief, and the new, the first in the sort of line of geriatric Soviet leaders, gave Syria a massive arms shipment to replace its arms stocks, and this would help, at least ostensibly, the Syrians achieve military parity with Israel. Just to give you an idea, this was around 1,200 new tanks, 210 new combat aircraft, 1,600 artillery pieces, and 90 air defense systems. So this is a massive military push by Moscow, and this enabled Syria to really change its strategic perspective. So they had gone from, in September, the nadir of their strategic outlook, to October, November, being in a far better strategic position as the United States is trying to push them out of Lebanon. It is also important to note that at the same time, the Syrians also are seeking to institutionalize and strengthen their relationships with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And this they do via, of course, the Lebanese Shia community. And this lays the groundwork for what becomes Hezbollah down the line. It's important to note that the Americans actually saw this happening in real time. And in one of his discussions with Abdel Halim Khaddam, Philip Habib actually approached the Syrian foreign minister regarding the inflow of both IRGC officials and material into the Bekaa Valley. And he said, quote, one second. I don't have the quote here. It's okay. He actually directly said, we know that you're bringing arms and material, and Khaddam denied it. So this is also an important point to go on. Yet, through all of this, the Syrians sought to essentially take their time and drag their feet. The Syrians were building up their network of proxies via the Iranians and also internally in Lebanon, while with Habib and Morris Draper, his deputy, essentially seeking to stall out and draw out the negotiations. And this prompted a change in Washington's strategy. Secretary of State George Shultz effectively said in his memoirs that Assad, of course, wanted Lebanon to become a Syrian satrapy, but that he sought essentially not to engage with him. And this was a determined decision on the part of the State Department that was not taken lightly by diplomats in the field, as we shall see. And he notes in his memoirs that the American strategy was effectively to leave out Syria. And he said, and I quote, "We kept Syria generally informed of the negotiations without inviting its participation in the discussions over the precise form of an agreement, of what an agreement might take." So this was Washington's determination as they began to push towards an agreement between Israel and Lebanon. Now, this was opposed actually by the diplomats in the State Department in the field, most prominently Robert Paganelli, who was the U.S. ambassador to Damascus. And Paganelli actually reported on the double game that Amin Jamal was trying to play behind the scenes, reporting on the fact that Jean Obeid, one of the chief advisors to Jamal, said that he wanted the Lebanese government wanted Syria to speak out more forcefully in opposing Israeli demands and negotiations. And he said, quote, "It might explain why Syrian and Saudi officials have spoken out forcefully in expressing their opposition to Israeli gains in current negotiations." So this is an important thing to note as well. Paganelli pleaded with the State Department to re-engage with the Syrians, but with its newfound confidence, its backing from the Soviets, its backing from its Iranian proxies, Syria had no interest in doing so, in reaching out to the United States. And Paganelli said, and I think this is absolutely fascinating diplomatic cable that I found in the archives, he said, quote, "Leaving the Syrians in isolation to stew in their own juice is one. Unfortunately, their juice spills out all over the area. Isolated or not, the Syrians are feared by their neighbors because of their capacity and willingness to use terror and subversion as instruments of national policy." So that in itself says it all. In addition, of course, this essentially met ahead. We're moving into April of 1983. As the negotiations really pick up pace, the Syrians, through their proxies, in this case the SSNP, as Yogev aptly mentioned, blew up the American embassy in Beirut, and this killed Robert Ames, the top CIA analyst in the Middle East. And this was done, of course, by a group called Islamic Jihad, which became the precursor to Hezbollah. And this prompted actually the Americans to even push full throttle towards an Israeli-Lebanese agreement. In fact, Reagan said that, sorry, one second. I lost my spot here. Reagan authored actually an article, a document to Secretary of State George Shultz, pushing the negotiations forward and encouraging the Americans to bring the diplomatic negotiations to a resolution. So, here we go. Oops. And this brings us at the end to the May 17th agreement. The May 17th agreement, which was signed, you can see on the right-hand side, the Israeli delegation with Dave Kimchi with the glasses, and on the left-hand side is the Lebanese legation led by Antoine Fatal in the middle, proved actually to be a form of a Pyrrhic victory for both Israel and the United States. And while it formalized ties between Israel and Lebanon, it actually gave the Syrians a loophole to essentially blow up the deal from the start. The deal also gave full recognition to Israel's ally in southern Lebanon, the Southern Lebanese Army, under the leadership of Saad Haddad. But the most important aspect was that loophole, which effectively gave the Syrians a veto over the deal. Now, just to circle back from the beginning, it's important to note that, of course, in the months that followed, Syria would increase their opposition to both the American and Israeli presence in Lebanon. But this period in time really formed the crux and the basis for their ability to do so. Strengthening its relations with the Soviets, receiving this massive arms shipment, and also institutionalizing its ties with Iran. And this really enabled Hafez al-Assad to succeed in laying the groundwork for Syria's future success in expelling the U.S. from Lebanon and consolidating its control over its near abroad. So, thank you all.